In this episode, we move up to the level where security stops being only a technical or departmental matter and becomes part of how the organization is directed, supervised, and held accountable. Brand new learners often hear corporate governance and picture board packets, formal meetings, and legal language, but the basic idea is simpler than that. Corporate governance is how an organization makes major decisions, assigns authority, oversees risk, and protects stakeholder trust over time. Information security belongs inside that system because cyber risk can disrupt operations, damage reputation, create legal exposure, and weaken the long-term health of the business just as much as financial or operational failures can. For someone preparing for the Certified Information Security Manager, CISM, this topic matters because security leadership is not complete when controls are deployed or incidents are handled well. It becomes mature when security is integrated into the same governance structure that shapes strategy, risk appetite, accountability, and oversight across the whole enterprise. Before we continue, a quick note. This audio course is a companion to our course companion books. The first book is about the exam and provides detailed information on how to pass it best. The second book is a Kindle-only ebook that contains 1,000 flashcards that can be used on your mobile device or Kindle. Check them both out at cyberauthor.me in the Bare Metal Study Guide series. A useful starting point is understanding what corporate governance actually means in plain language. Corporate governance is the system by which an organization is directed and controlled, including the roles of the board, senior executives, committees, policies, internal controls, and reporting channels that help leaders guide the enterprise responsibly. It exists so that authority is clear, major decisions are reviewed, risks are visible, and the organization serves its owners, customers, regulators, employees, and other stakeholders in a disciplined way. Once you understand governance that way, it becomes obvious that information security cannot sit outside it as a purely technical concern. Security affects the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of information and services, which means it affects trust, continuity, compliance, market confidence, and the organization's ability to pursue its goals without unacceptable disruption. If those issues matter to the enterprise, then they must also matter to the system that governs the enterprise. It also helps to separate information security governance from corporate governance while seeing how closely the two must connect. Information security governance focuses on how security is directed, prioritized, measured, and overseen within the organization, while corporate governance is the larger framework that guides the entire enterprise. Integration means security governance is not allowed to operate as a side system with its own language, its own priorities, and its own assumptions disconnected from enterprise leadership. Instead, security decisions are linked to business strategy, board oversight, risk management, internal control expectations, and executive accountability. If that link is weak, security may remain busy but isolated, with teams solving technical problems while senior leaders fail to understand how security conditions affect business exposure. When the link is strong, security becomes part of mainstream governance, and leaders can treat cyber risk with the same seriousness they would give financial misstatement, legal violations, or major operational breakdowns. One reason this integration matters so much is that security problems rarely stay inside the technology department, even when the first signs appear there. A ransomware event can stop revenue, delay patient care, interrupt manufacturing, or prevent customers from using essential services. A data exposure can trigger lawsuits, regulatory scrutiny, public distrust, and long-term reputational damage that extends far beyond the system that was originally compromised. Weak identity controls can lead to fraud, unsafe transactions, or strategic information loss that affects executive decision-making and competitive position. In other words, security is not just protecting machines. It is protecting business objectives, stakeholder confidence, and the organization's ability to operate responsibly. That is why integration into corporate governance matters so much. It moves security out of the narrow category of technical support and places it where it belongs, alongside the broader oversight of enterprise risk, ethics, resilience, and long-term value. The board of directors sits at the top of this picture because the board is responsible for overseeing the organization's direction, major risks, and leadership accountability. The board does not configure systems or investigate alerts. but it does need enough visibility to understand whether information security risk is being governed properly and whether management is taking the issue seriously enough. That means the board should understand how cyber risk could affect strategy, operations, legal obligations, reputation, and financial performance, not just whether the security team has bought new tools. In some organizations, the board handles this through an audit committee, a risk committee, or a dedicated technology or cybersecurity committee, but the exact structure matters less than the fact that meaningful oversight exists. For beginners, the key lesson is that board involvement does not mean board micromanagement. It means security is visible at the level where the enterprise decides what risk is acceptable, what resilience is expected, and how leadership will be held accountable if those expectations are not being met. Senior management is the next critical layer, because integration fails quickly if executives treat information security as something the security leader owns alone. The chief executive officer, chief financial officer, chief operating officer, general counsel, technology leaders, business unit leaders, and other senior executives all influence decisions that shape cyber risk. They approve budgets, accept trade-offs, set priorities, sponsor major initiatives, and decide how much disruption or cost the organization is willing to tolerate in exchange for faster growth or operational speed. A mature governance model makes it clear that the security leader provides expertise, visibility, and challenge, but business leadership still owns the risk created by the activities it directs. This is one of the most important ideas for new learners because it prevents a common misconception. Security cannot be fully integrated into corporate governance if executives think they can delegate all security accountability downward and still claim that cyber risk is under control. Integration means responsibility is shared, visible, and tied to real business authority. Risk management is where this integration often becomes most visible in practice. When security is truly part of corporate governance, cyber risk is not discussed as an isolated technical category, but as one part of overall enterprise risk. That means leaders look at how security risk interacts with operational risk, financial risk, legal risk, strategic risk, and third-party risk, rather than treating cyber issues as separate from the rest of the business. Integration also means the organization's risk appetite should influence security decisions. If leadership has low tolerance for disruption in critical services, then security governance should support stronger resilience, recovery planning, and oversight in those areas. If the organization is willing to accept some innovation risk to move quickly into new markets, then security strategy should still help leaders understand the boundaries of that decision and the controls needed to prevent reckless exposure. Security becomes much more effective when it is connected to enterprise risk discussions instead of being presented as a parallel world with its own disconnected priorities. Another major part of integration is the internal control environment, because corporate governance depends on more than broad statements of intent. It depends on policies, standards, review mechanisms, approvals, and accountability practices that help the organization operate in a controlled and ethical way. Information security should be woven into that environment so that access decisions, data handling, change management, third-party onboarding, incident escalation, and exception approval all reflect governance expectations rather than ad hoc local choices. This matters because many serious security failures come from weak controlled discipline rather than exotic attacks. A rushed change, an unreviewed vendor connection, a poorly handled exception, or a lack of separation of duties can expose the organization just as surely as a malicious external actor can. When security is integrated into corporate governance, these control questions are no longer treated as narrow technical details. They become part of the wider conversation about how the enterprise protects trust, follows its obligations, and ensures that important decisions are made with proper oversight. Reporting is another place where integration either becomes real or remains mostly symbolic. If information about security is reported upward only in technical jargon, raw alert counts, or tool status updates, board members and executives may struggle to understand what actually matters. Effective governance reporting translates security conditions into business-relevant terms such as service risk, exposure of sensitive information, resilience gaps, control breakdowns, trend changes, incident impact, and readiness to support strategic goals. Good reporting also includes enough candor to show where the organization is exposed, not just where the security function has been active. For a beginner, this is a crucial lesson because governance depends on decision quality, and decision quality depends on whether leaders receive clear, useful information. Security becomes integrated into corporate governance when leaders can see how cyber issues affect enterprise health, ask informed questions, and hold management accountable based on meaningful insight rather than generic reassurance. Budgeting and investment decisions also reveal whether security is truly integrated into corporate governance. In a weak model, security funding is treated as a reluctant expense that appears only after incidents, audits, or external pressure force attention. In a stronger model, security investment is part of strategic planning and is discussed in terms of protecting business objectives, supporting trusted growth, improving resilience, and reducing the likelihood or impact of material loss. This does not mean every security request should be approved, because corporate governance requires disciplined trade-offs. It does mean the organization should evaluate security spending through the same governance lens it uses for other important enterprise decisions, asking what risk is being reduced, what capability is being strengthened, and how the investment supports long-term business stability. For CISM learners, this is an important connection. When security is part of corporate governance, budget conversations move beyond fear and become more grounded in enterprise value, oversight responsibility, and rational risk-based prioritization. Integration into corporate governance becomes even more important when the organization depends heavily on third parties, acquisitions, cloud platforms, outsourced services, or digital business ecosystems. In those situations, cyber risk often enters through contracts, partnerships, inherited systems, shared data, and decisions made outside the traditional security team. A governance approach that keeps security isolated will struggle to manage these exposures because the real risk may be created during procurement, merger planning, vendor oversight, product launches, or strategic partnerships. When security is integrated, those activities include the right questions early enough to matter. Leaders ask how a vendor will protect sensitive information, what an acquisition will add to the risk landscape, how a new digital service changes exposure, and whether external dependencies align with the organization's tolerance for disruption or loss. For beginners, this shows why corporate governance matters so much. Many of the most important security decisions are not made in a security operations center. They are made in planning meetings, contract reviews, and executive trade-off discussions where future enterprise risk is being quietly shaped. Culture is another powerful factor because governance only works when the organization's behavior supports the structure on paper. If leaders speak about security as a priority but reward only speed and short-term output, employees will quickly learn that security expectations are secondary. If managers hide bad news, delay escalation, or treat policy exceptions as routine shortcuts, integration into corporate governance becomes shallow even if committees and reports look formal. A mature governance environment reinforces the idea that security is part of responsible leadership and responsible work, not a separate burden imposed from the outside. That means executives model accountability, managers surface issues honestly, and teams understand that reporting risk early is a sign of professionalism rather than weakness. For a new learner, this is an important reminder that corporate governance is not just structure. It is also tone, behavior, and consistent follow-through. Security becomes truly integrated when the organization treats it as part of how good decisions are made, even when time pressure, cost pressure, or competitive pressure makes that discipline inconvenient. There are several common signs that information security has not yet been well integrated into corporate governance. One is when the board hears about cyber issues only after a major incident or only through overly optimistic summaries that hide real exposure. Another is when business leaders assume the security team owns all cyber risk, even though their own decisions create much of that risk through projects, vendors, data use, and operational shortcuts. A third sign is when security policies exist, but exception handling, investment decisions, and strategic planning occur without meaningful security oversight. By contrast, mature integration is visible when cyber risk is part of enterprise risk discussion, when leaders receive decision-ready reporting, when security is involved early in major initiatives, and when accountability for security outcomes is shared across management rather than pushed downward. For beginners, these contrasts are useful because they show that integration is not a vague claim. It can be observed in the way the organization makes decisions, discusses risk, allocates resources, and responds when trade-offs become difficult. As you step back from the whole topic, the central lesson is that integrating information security into corporate governance means placing security where major enterprise decisions already happen. It means the board provides meaningful oversight, executives share accountability, cyber risk is treated as part of overall enterprise risk, internal controls include security discipline, reporting supports real leadership decisions, and investment choices reflect the role security plays in protecting strategy and trust. For someone new to CISM, the most important takeaway is that security leadership becomes far more effective when it is connected to the organization's formal direction and oversight rather than operating as a technically capable but structurally isolated function. Done well, this integration helps the organization make better trade-offs, see risk more clearly, and respond to changing conditions with greater discipline and resilience. Done poorly, it leaves security busy but peripheral, which is a dangerous place to be in a world where cyber events can shape the future of the entire enterprise. That is why this topic matters so much. Corporate governance is not separate from security leadership. It is one of the main places where that leadership proves whether it truly belongs at the enterprise level.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.